Checking your ignition points and resetting them. Today looks like a nice day for a drive. So maybe we'll take the top off. We'll start our 230 SL. I think this is a 230. No, this is actually a 280. This is my dream 280, a 68 Euro market 5-speed with no other option. So, okay. But imagine that instead of that nice blatty exhaust, the 280 SL instead is going. Maybe it's time to check the ignition point gap. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard about point gap, and some of you know exactly what it is. But we're going to talk today about how ignition points actually go bad, so that if you've just acquired a Mercedes with points ignition, you have a better understanding of where the problems with the system lie and how to easily address them. In the last video, we talked about how a bad condenser can make your car stall. But in this video, we're going to talk specifically just about ignition points because they're that important. Now, point gap is the distance between this part of the points, the fixed contact, and this part of the point, the moving contact. And it is activated when the distributor cam pushes this little rubbing block open, right here. Now the rubbing block has to be constantly lubricated or it wears. That's why in the last video I said put points grease on the ignition cam, on the distributor cam. But as it wears, the gap narrows. And this gap was never a big gap. It was always a tiny gap. On most Mercedes, it's 0.35 millimeter, and sometimes the point gap can be as big as 0.45 millimeter, which is the average point gap on a 300 SEL 6.3. But on every other Mercedes, it's 0.3 to 0.4 millimeter. So 0.35 is what I call a perfect average. Now, this gap is not going to stay the same over time. Once you set it, you have to check it every oil change or whatever to make sure it's not getting too small. And on battery ignition points, you're really supposed to replace the points when the gap reaches the minimum instead of readjusting them. But there are some notable exceptions. At 300 SEL 6.3, this has to happen from time to time, for example. So anyway, when your ignition points get old, you may notice pitting right here and pitting right here. And these two contacts, where they come together, there's so much electricity here that it will eventually, like a miniature welding arc, degrade the point gap. Now, as time goes on, the contacts are not going to be easy to set with a feeler gauge because they're going to look like jagged pieces of metal. So then it's either time in a pinch to file them, or in a less of a pinch, replace your points. You know, filing points is a temporary repair. Now, if you need to test your points and see if they're working, the procedure is simple. With your ignition off, I'm going to repeat, with your ignition off, remove the distributor cap and the rotor. And get a well-insulated screwdriver and a glove. Make sure the area is free of moisture. Turn the ignition on, and then with your screwdriver, open and close the points to make sure that there's a spark. If you see a strong, healthy spark, it means your condenser, resistor, points, and condenser are all working. But if you don't see a spark, then you may have a point problem with your points constantly grounding. Remember the ohmmeter test. Or you may have a problem with your condenser, or your resistor could be burned out, something, you know. The coil is actually usually the least of the issues unless it's an incorrect coil. So always watch out for incorrect parts. Now, the next thing that happens on these cars is that the on transistorized systems, the points fail to close and make a complete ground. So on these on earlier systems, like the one in the 69 280SL, you would just have, or 68 280SL, you have Hedary ignition or battery ignition, where the points carry a relatively large voltage load and thus do not last forever. But on cars that have transistorized ignition, it's a different story. The points are nothing more than a signaling device. Open is unground, closed is ground. When the points close, the transistorized ignition control unit fires off the coil. And in this case, you want to either pull the distributor or rotate the engine slowly, find the spade connector for the points and disconnect it from the entire system, and make sure that when the points open, you have infinite resistance, and when they close, you have 0 ohms of resistance or perfect resistance. So that means they're opening and closing. No contact, contact. No contact, contact. No contact, contact. And that's what makes the TI control unit fire off. More points problems, which are the cheap disposable part, have caused people to replace unnecessarily transistorized ignition systems than any other problem. And that's why I warn people, don't write off your points. They are critical to the successful operation of a TI system. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Please tap the bell for notifications. Enjoy servicing and working on your Mercedes ignition system. And remember, don't give up on old technology. I mean, if you're working on one of these systems and you run into problems, you know, and we can all learn a lot about this, including me, have a little humility. Ask for some help from somebody who might know what they're doing with one of these, because you may be overlooking a small detail that could be keeping your point system from working. And that's what I always tell people. Don't get frustrated and throw your hands up in the air. Sometimes there's something you just don't know about or understand. And I found that on these systems, there were multiple occasions where I needed just a little bit of help to get the car to run better, or in one case, even get the car to start. And in, you know, and especially with those Turkish condensers that were so terrible, which even Mercedes sells sometimes. If you get them from Mercedes, sometimes they'll sell you the wrong part number, God forbid. So anyway, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and invite somebody else to watch this channel so that they can learn more about their Mercedes. And in the meantime, away we go.